First thing is I have a MEG15 assembly checklist with the Apex 4 electronics, and in this case we're going to be using the secondary handset option and a 5.5 pound radial. The secondary handset option that I'll be using is a Shearwater Petrol. I also can use a Shearwater Nerd as a secondary system. They're fine pieces of equipment, and I wholeheartedly recommend them as using them on the as a secondary monitoring system on the Megalodon. First thing I've done is I wrote my name down on the checklist, put the date, today's date. I wrote down the MEG ID, which is in the bottom of the can. I wrote down the serial number of the oxygen sensors. Now, writing down the serial number of the oxygen sensors, you don't have to do that every time on the checklist. If you have a stack of checklists that you've been using every weekend, unless you've changed the sensor, don't worry about filling out the serial number on each one of your checklists. Don't waste that time. Generally, a well-trained MEG diver, one that's spent time in a 7-day course with me, can put their rebreather together or the MEG together in about 25 minutes. That includes generally filling the scrubber and analyzing the gas. Okay, so yeah, you can do this pretty quickly. So we go down into battery service dates. These are the dates that the battery has been installed, or when I charge the handset or put a battery in the handset. So I have one for the primary network and the secondary network on the MEG15. All right, so on the top here it says note initial only when the task has been performed. I use my initials. I don't use a check mark. This ensures it's a legal document. It's even a good idea to use a pen when you do this. In this case, I'm using a pencil. The reason you want an initial after you've done the task is to make sure that the phone rings. If you have initialed the task off after you read it, but you didn't do it, and you have to go to a distraction, such as your phone, you might come back and forget where you left off. You don't want to do that. So do the task first, then go ahead and initial off. All right, so the first thing on the checklist, it says 1, during assembly, inspect all parts for dirt, deterioration, damage, and lubrication. That means I'm going to be checking as I go, and I will be lubricating all the O-ring seals as I go if it's required. So I'm going to go ahead and initial that off. I understand, that's what I'm going to do. Number 2, charge O2 and diluent cylinders if necessary. These 2 cylinders were charged. Next thing it says, analyze the oxygen percent and diluent percent. And that's what I'm going to do now. So I'll go over here to my handy analogs, turn it on. I will go ahead and calibrate it to air. I'm at 1 atmosphere of pressure. So I set it for 20.9. And I will also set the helium to 0. This is an oxygen helium analyzer. So the nitrogen is reading proper. Go back to the oxygen. Put on the appropriate extension hose. And I'll go ahead and analyze the dill first. I have 21.3. This was a piece of tape from a prior dive and prior analysis. I'll go ahead and replace it with a fresh piece of tape. This is cylinder labeling. The 3 things that Innerspace advocates as far as cylinder labeling goes is the date of the analysis, the contents of the gas, and the person's initials. That way you know who analyzed it, when it got analyzed, and what's in it. And if there's any doubt in your mind what's in the cylinder, you may have analyzed it a month or 2 ago, it's always a good idea to reanalyze. And it's a good thing to see if the gas contents have even changed. All right, so I'll go ahead, I had 21.3%. Put my initials, and I'll put the date. All right, so I just analyzed and labeled the diluent cylinder. I'll go ahead and come over here, analyzed is the O2 cylinder. And of course, before I start any analysis, I make sure that the analyzer is reading, is calibrated appropriately to the contents, such as air. So I have a reference gas. All right, I'm at 100. Good to go there. So I'm gonna write down, I'll label this, tear off the old one. All right, both of my cylinders are analyzed. Put my tools away, and I'll write down 100% here, 21.3, initial off. Step 3, analyze bailout and C.E.O cylinders. That's oxygen, helium, bailout. In this case, I've already analyzed my bailout cylinder. It's a 40 cubic foot cylinder with a 7-foot hose on it. Has a BOV QC6 connector on it, and it has a dry suit inflator hose on it. So I analyzed this, and it reads 21.4%. And of course, there's 3 places here that you can write down the gas contents for the other 2 cylinders, such as your helium bottom mix. You've got your C.E.O mix, and you might have oxygen. All right, so I'll sign off on 3. Number 4, record accumulated service time on CO2 absorbent canister. I have filled it, and at 0 minutes. Expiration date on the CO2 keg. That's where I got the material from to fill my canister. I know it says April 2017. Number 5, fill scrubber canister if fresh scrubber needed. Don't need it, I'll put a line through that. Number 6, install moisture pads with stand and CO2 canister. Inspect the 2 CO2 canister mating O-rings and head assembly. So I have the head sitting there. I'll go ahead, grab my scrubber stand. My moisture pads are all lined up. And these are the stanchions right here, and you can see where each one of these, that's where the stanchions on the stand fit. I'm just gonna push this down in the middle, and see the 4 sections pop up there, and I'm just gonna carefully push these into the sides of the stand. And you can see that's in there nicely. I'll drop that in as per the instructions. Next thing I'll do is pick up my 5.5 pound canister, which has absorbent in it. And if you look at the top, there's a piece of tape there from the day I filled it. And it says 0 minutes. And it has my initials on there. If you're diving with a lot of other divers using the same rebreather, put your name on your stuff so it's not confused with anybody else's. All right, next thing is check the 2 O-rings. The O-rings are present. If any case you've performed any maintenance, such as replace these O-rings, a good trick is to make sure that everything fits properly. Put the head on top of the scrubber canister and make sure it fits tight. This fits snug, so I know it's gonna work, and that ensures no scrubber bypass, or CO2 bypass, excuse me. All right, so that's good to go. Number 8, inspect sensors for cracks, damage, or leaking KOH. KOH is potassium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide is the electrolyte that's inside the sensors. If the sensor gets damaged for some reason, that KOH can leak out into your breathing loop. And what you don't want is to be breathing those chemicals in your rebreather. So that's one of the reasons we put the sensors on the exhalation side, where you have the scrubber separating any caustic material, such as the KOH. It would have to, well, basically the scrubber would help protect you from any VOCs and so on. So, all right, and also the sensors stay considerably drier this way on the XL side. All right, so I'm going to be inspecting the sensors, and let's see. Inspect sensors for crack, damage, or leaking KOH. I'm looking, I don't see anything, there's nothing obvious. That's good to go. Ensure sensors are screwed down and locked in place by sensor plate. No sensor movement is allowed. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going through here, gently checking to make sure the nuts are tight, and there's no movement in this plate right here. There can be no movement in this plate. If that plate moves, if you took this plate off and had pulled the O-ring off, which secures the plate, and you didn't put it back properly, then you may lose your sensor connection because the sensors can move out of place. So it's critically important that you put everything back in place, and there'll be a video showing you that step. Okay, so that looks good to go. Inspect lid assembly for waterproof integrity. That's the O-rings and all fitted components. So the one thing I'm going to be doing is I'm checking, making sure this O2 inlet right here is tight. I'm going to the breathing hose couplings, make sure they're tight. I'm just going to actually kind of tighten down on this piece right here. This is the inhalation sensor carriage right here. That's good to go. I'm going to check the solenoid, make sure it's tight. And I have 2 O-rings on the outside of the lid. Everything looks like it's watertight. Sign off on 9.